The silence in the communication center stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Commander Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating before her, its blue light casting strange shadows across her weathered face. The message had arrived 3 hours ago, and every linguist, cryptographer, and xenobiologist aboard the UES Retribution had been working to decode it. "Ma'am, we've got something," called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from his station, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ship's systems. The young officer's fingers danced across his console, pulling up streams of data that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those trained in alien communications. Chen moved closer, her boots clicking against the metal floor of the bridge. Around her, the crew of humanity's most advanced warship continued their duties, but she could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew this was different. In the 40 years since humanity had developed faster-than-light travel, they had encountered exactly 0 alien civilizations. The universe had seemed empty, cold, and distinctly lacking in intelligence beyond their own. "What do we have, Rodriguez?" Chen asked, leaning over his shoulder to examine the scrolling text on his screen. "It's definitely artificial, Commander. The signal originates from the Kepler 442 system, approximately 1,200 light-years from Earth. The mathematical progression embedded in the transmission suggests intelligence, but..." Rodriguez paused, his brow furrowing as he highlighted specific portions of the decoded message. "But what, Lieutenant?" "The signal contains what appears to be coordinates, star charts, and something else. Dr. Yamamoto from the linguistics department believes it might be a plea for help. The repeated patterns suggest urgency, maybe even desperation." Chen straightened, her mind racing through the implications. The Retribution wasn't an exploration vessel. She commanded a dreadnought, one of 12 ships in humanity's war fleet designed for one purpose: to defend Earth and its colonies from threats. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity's first contact with alien intelligence might come through her ship's communication array rather than the peaceful exploration vessels of the, Colonial Survey Corps. "Where's Admiral Morrison?" she asked, referring to the fleet commander aboard the flagship UES Sovereignty. "In conference with the other ship commanders, ma'am. They're discussing response protocols." The bridge doors hissed open and Dr. Elena Yamamoto entered, her usually pristine lab coat wrinkled from hours of intense work. The xenolinguist carried a tablet clutched to her chest, and her eyes held the wild look of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. "Commander Chen, you need to see this," Yamamoto said without preamble. She activated her tablet, projecting a 3-dimensional map into the air between them. Star systems pulsed with different colors, connected by flowing lines that suggested movement or territory. "We've managed to decode more of the signal. This isn't just a distress call, it's a warning. The civilization sending this message is under attack. They're being systematically destroyed by something they call the Harvesters. Based on the stellar cartography included in their message, at least 17 solar systems have already fallen." Chen studied the map, noting how the affected systems formed a rough sphere of influence that seemed to be expanding outward. "How far is this from human space?" "That's the concerning part, Commander. If their rate of expansion continues, they'll reach our outer colonies within 50 years. Maybe less." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. Humanity had always assumed that if they encountered hostile aliens, they would have time to prepare, time to negotiate, time to understand the threat. This message suggested otherwise. Somewhere in the galaxy, an alien civilization was being exterminated, and the killers were moving in humanity's general direction. "Ma'am," Rodriguez interrupted. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Morrison. All ship commanders are to report to the Sovereignty immediately for emergency briefing." Chen nodded grimly. "Dr. Yamamoto, compile everything you have. I want full linguistic analysis, threat assessment, and your best guess at the timeline we're working with." Rodriguez maintained monitoring of all frequencies. "If that signal changes or if we receive any follow-up transmissions, I want to know immediately." As she prepared to leave for the Admiral's briefing, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that humanity stood at a crossroads. For 40 years they had built their interstellar civilization in peaceful isolation, expanding slowly and carefully among the stars. The Warfleet existed as a precaution, a deterrent against theoretical threats that most people believed would never materialize. Now, faced with evidence of an active genocidal force operating in their galaxy, humanity's leaders would have to make a choice. They could attempt to hide, hoping the Harvesters would never find them. They could try to strengthen their defenses and prepare for the worst. Or they could do something that no one had seriously considered. They could answer the distress call. The shuttle bay of the Sovereignty buzzed with activity as commanders from all 12 ships of the war fleet gathered. These weren't explorers or diplomats, they were warriors, trained to protect humanity from any threat. Admiral Morrison, a grizzled veteran of the colonial wars, stood at the center of the briefing room, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the weight of the decision before them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets for over 2 decades. "We are no longer alone in the universe. Unfortunately, our neighbors appear to be in serious trouble." The holographic display activated, showing the same stellar map that Dr. Yamamoto had presented to Chen. The expanding sphere of dead worlds painted a grim picture of systematic destruction on a scale that dwarfed anything in human history. "Intelligence suggests we're looking at a mobile force of unknown composition and capability. They've wiped out 17 star systems in approximately 50 years. That's not random raiding or resource gathering, that's methodical extermination." Commander Zhang of the UES Defiance raised her hand. "Sir, what's our assessment of the aliens sending the distress signal? Are they a threat to humanity?" Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. "According to our xenobiologists, the mathematical concepts in their transmission suggest a civilization roughly equivalent to our own technological level. They're not significantly more advanced than us, which makes their defeat by these harvesters all the more concerning." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. If beings with technology similar to humanity's were being systematically destroyed, what chance would Earth have against the same enemy? The room fell silent as each commander grappled with the magnitude of the situation. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence had revealed not a universe full of wonder and possibility, but one where genocide operated on an interstellar scale. Admiral Morrison's weathered hands gripped the edge of the briefing table as he surveyed the faces of his commanders. Each one represented years of training, countless simulations, and the very best of humanity's military tradition. Yet none of them had ever faced a situation quite like this. "The question before us," Morrison continued, "is whether we respond to this distress call or maintain our current defensive posture around human space." He gestured to the holographic display, where the expanding sphere of destruction seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. "Command back on Earth has given us discretionary authority to act as we see fit." Commander Williams of the UES Thunderstrike leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we be focusing on fortifying our own systems? If these harvesters are as dangerous as the data suggests, we might be throwing away our only advantage, the element of surprise and distance." Chen found herself speaking before she had fully formed her thoughts. "Commander Williams raises a valid point, but consider this. If we wait for them to find us, we'll be fighting a purely defensive war against an enemy that's already proven they can destroy civilizations. The aliens sending this distress signal have been fighting for 50 years. They know these harvesters' tactics, their weaknesses, their patterns." Dr. Yamamoto, who had been granted special permission to attend the briefing, cleared her throat. "If I may, Admiral, the linguistic analysis reveals something crucial. The distress signal isn't just asking for help, it's offering intelligence. Embedded in their transmission are tactical data about harvester ship configurations, attack patterns, and what appears to be the location of their primary staging area." The room erupted in murmurs. Admiral Morrison raised his hand for silence. "Explain, Doctor." Yamamoto activated her tablet, adding new layers to the holographic display. Red indicators showed known harvester positions, while blue lines traced their movement patterns. The alien civilization they call themselves the Keith have been conducting a fighting retreat for decades. They've learned to predict harvester behavior, and they're sharing that knowledge with us. Commander Zhang studied the tactical display intently. "This staging area, how far from their current position?" "Approximately 40 light years from the Keith's last known position. It appears to be a massive mobile construction facility, possibly where the harvesters build their ships or process the resources they extract from conquered worlds." Chen felt her pulse quicken. In all her years of military service, she had learned to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. "Admiral, if the Keith intelligence is accurate, we're looking at the possibility of striking at the heart of harvester operations before they even know we exist." Morrison nodded slowly. The same thought occurred to me, Commander, but we're talking about committing our entire war fleet, based on information from an alien civilization we've never met, against an enemy we know nothing about. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Commander Park from the UES Vigilance. What's our timeline? How long before the harvesters reach Keith space entirely? Dr. Yamamoto consulted her tablet. Based on their current rate of advance and the last transmission we received, the Keith have perhaps 6 months before their final stronghold falls. Maybe less. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. 6 months to mount an expedition across 1,200 light-years of space, make contact with an alien civilization, and somehow turn the tide of a war that had been raging for half a century. There's another factor to consider, Chen said, her voice cutting through the contemplative silence. The psychological impact on both our species and theirs. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence could be as their saviors, rather than as conquerors or victims. The diplomatic and strategic advantages of that relationship could be immense. Admiral Morrison stood and began pacing, a habit Chen recognized from their previous campaigns together. When Morrison paced, he was working through contingencies, calculating risks and rewards with the precision of a master tactician. The logistics alone are staggering, Morrison mused aloud. 12 ships, 30,000 personnel, enough supplies for an extended campaign in unknown space. We'd be operating without backup, without the ability to call for reinforcements. Commander Williams shifted uncomfortably. Admiral, I have to voice my concerns again. We're humanity's primary defense force. If we're wrong about this, if it's a trap or if we lose the fleet, Earth becomes defenseless. Not defenseless, corrected Commander Torres from the UES Guardian. The orbital defense platforms and the colonial defense forces would still exist. We're not the only military assets humanity possesses. Chen watched the debate unfold, recognizing the fundamental tension between caution and action that had defined military strategy for centuries. She thought about the signal, about the desperation embedded in its mathematical structures, about an alien civilization facing extinction while humanity debated whether to help. Admiral, she said, standing to address the room, I volunteer the Retribution to lead a reconnaissance mission. A single ship could make the journey, establish contact with the Keith and assess the situation firsthand. If the intelligence proves accurate and the opportunity exists, we could signal for the rest of the fleet. The suggestion created an immediate stir. A reconnaissance mission was less risky than committing the entire fleet. But it also meant sending a single ship into potentially hostile territory with no backup. Morrison stopped pacing and fixed Chen with his steely gaze. Commander, you're talking about a 1,200 light-year journey into unknown space, possibly straight into a war zone. The Retribution is a dreadnought, not a scout ship. Exactly, sir. If we encounter hostiles, we have the firepower to defend ourselves. If we find allies, we have the capability to make a meaningful contribution to their defense efforts. And if the situation is hopeless, we have the speed to escape and warn the fleet. Dr. Yamamoto leaned forward eagerly. Commander Chen, if you're serious about this, I request permission to accompany the mission. The linguistic challenges alone will require constant analysis and adaptation. First contact protocols demand a xenolinguist be present. Morrison resumed his pacing, but Chen could see the decision crystallizing in his expression. The Admiral was a man of action, someone who had built his reputation on bold moves and calculated risks. The idea of sending a single ship to assess the situation appealed to his tactical sensibilities. The journey time alone would be significant, Morrison said. Even with our fastest FTL drives, we're looking at 3 weeks each way. That's 6 weeks minimum before we even know if the Keith still exist. Sir, Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system. We're receiving another transmission from the Keith system. Dr. Yamamoto's presence is requested in the communication center immediately. The timing seemed almost providential. Yamamoto gathered her equipment quickly, but before leaving she turned to address the assembled commanders. There's something else about the Keith transmissions that I haven't mentioned yet. The mathematical structures they use aren't just functional, they're elegant, beautiful even. These aren't the communications of a primitive civilization or a species driven mad by desperation. They're maintaining scientific rigor and cultural sophistication, even in the face of extinction. With that observation hanging in the air, Yamamoto hurried from the briefing room, leaving the commanders to contemplate not just the tactical implications of first contact, but the moral weight of potentially abandoning an intelligent species to genocide. Admiral Morrison looked around the room one final time, reading the faces of his most trusted officers. The decision was his to make, but he could see the consensus building. Humanity had dreamed of finding other intelligent life among the stars. Now that they had, the question wasn't whether to make contact, but whether they had the courage to risk everything to save their new neighbors from annihilation. The communication center aboard the Sea Sovereignty buzzed with unprecedented activity. Dr. Yamamoto worked frantically at her station while Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated with communication officers from across the fleet. The second transmission from the Keith had arrived with far more complexity than the first, containing what appeared to be real-time tactical data and urgent requests for immediate assistance. Dr. Yamamoto, what are we looking at? Admiral Morrison asked as he entered the chamber, followed closely by Commander Chen and several other senior officers. Yamamoto's fingers flew across her interface, pulling up multiple data streams simultaneously. Admiral, this is extraordinary. The Keith aren't just sending a general distress call anymore. They're transmitting detailed battle reports, real-time position updates, and what appears to be a direct plea for military intervention. The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional battlefield representation. Red markers indicated harvester forces, while blue markers showed Keith positions. The tactical situation looked desperate. The Keith were clearly outnumbered and surrounded. They're asking specifically for ships with heavy weaponry and advanced defensive capabilities. Yamamoto continued. The transmission includes technical specifications for what they believe would be effective against harvester technology. Commander Chen studied the display intently. How are they getting this information to us in real time? Even at faster-than-light communication speeds, there should be significant delays over those distances. Rodriguez looked up from his station, excitement evident in his voice. Ma'am, that's the remarkable part. They're using a quantum entanglement communication array. The technology is more advanced than anything we've developed, but the principles are familiar. They must have established the quantum pairs decades ago, anticipating the need for instantaneous long-range communication. Admiral Morrison absorbed this information with the calculating mind of a career military officer. Advanced communication technology suggested the Keith were more sophisticated than initial assessments indicated. It also meant they had been planning for this moment, preparing for the possibility of outside intervention in their war. Dr. Yamamoto, can we respond through the same channel? Morrison asked. I believe so, sir. Lieutenant Rodriguez and I have been working on establishing a compatible transmission protocol. We should be able to send basic mathematical concepts and simple messages. Chen felt her heart rate accelerate. Humanity was about to engage in its first real-time conversation with an alien intelligence. The historical significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Admiral, she said, request permission to draft a response. If we're going to do this, we need to establish our capabilities and intentions clearly. Morrison nodded. Granted. But keep it simple and factual. We don't want any misunderstandings about our level of commitment or capability. Chen moved to the communication console, working with Yamamoto to craft a message that would convey humanity's military strength without revealing strategic weaknesses. The challenge lay in communicating complex tactical concepts through mathematics and basic symbolic logic. After 20 minutes of careful construction, they had assembled a response that included humanity's fleet composition, weapon capabilities, defensive technologies, and an estimated timeline for potential arrival in Keith space. Most importantly, the message requested detailed intelligence about harvester capabilities and weaknesses. Send it, Morrison ordered. The transmission crossed the galaxy in an instant, carrying with it humanity's first words to another intelligent species. The communication center fell silent as everyone waited for a response. It came within minutes. Admiral, Rodriguez called out, his voice tight with excitement and concern. We're receiving massive data packets. The Keith are sending everything. Complete technical specifications for harvester ships, tactical analyses of their weapon systems, detailed reports on their strategic behavior patterns. The main display became a flood of information. Harvester vessel designs that looked like twisted combinations of organic and mechanical components. Weapon systems that seemed to operate on principles of directed energy and exotic matter manipulation. Most disturbing of all, evidence of their systematic approach to planetary destruction and resource extraction. Dr. Yamamoto worked furiously to process the incoming data. Admiral, the Harvesters aren't just conquerors, they're processors. They're converting entire civilizations into raw materials for their expansion. The Keith estimate that over 2 billion intelligent beings have been processed in the past 50 years. The magnitude of the genocide hit the room like a physical blow. 2 billion intelligent lives representing cultures, technologies, art, and wisdom that would never exist again. The number was almost too large to comprehend. There's more, Yamamoto continued. The Keith are sending coordinates for what they call their final stronghold. It's a heavily fortified system with artificial defensive installations built over the past 30 years. They're offering it as a staging area for joint operations. Commander Chen studied the technical specifications for Harvester vessels, noting several potential vulnerabilities. Admiral, look at this. Their ships rely heavily on distributed computing networks for coordination. If we could disrupt their communication systems, we might be able to create tactical advantages even against superior numbers. Morrison leaned over her shoulder, examining the data with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing enemy capabilities. The Keith have identified this weakness as well. They've had some success with electromagnetic pulse weapons, but they lack the firepower to exploit the advantage effectively. A new transmission indicator appeared on Rodriguez's console. Sir, the Keith are requesting immediate clarification on our timeline. According to their latest intelligence, the Harvesters are preparing for a final assault on their stronghold system. They estimate 3 weeks before the attack begins. The timeline created an immediate crisis. Even if Admiral Morrison ordered the fleet to depart immediately, the journey to Keith space would take nearly 3 weeks. They would arrive just as the final battle was beginning, with no time for coordination or strategic planning. Chen felt the weight of command decisions settling on her shoulders. Admiral, the reconnaissance mission concept won't work with this timeline. If we're going to help the Keith, it has to be the entire fleet, and it has to be now. Morrison stood silently for several moments, processing the tactical situation. Around him, the communication center continued to receive data from across the galaxy. An alien civilization sharing its most closely guarded military secrets in a desperate bid for survival. Commander Chen, Morrison said finally, you volunteered the retribution for reconnaissance. Are you prepared to volunteer for something much more significant? Chen met his gaze steadily. Sir, I believe humanity has a responsibility to respond to this crisis. But more than that, I believe we have an opportunity to prevent a genocidal force from potentially threatening our own civilization in the future. The political ramifications will be enormous, Morrison warned. We'll be committing humanity to an interstellar war without direct authorization from Earth. The decision we make in this room could determine the future of our species' place in the galaxy. Dr. Yamamoto looked up from her analysis station. Admiral, there's something else. The Keith have included cultural and scientific databases in their transmissions. They're not just asking for military aid. They're offering to share centuries of accumulated knowledge. Mathematical theorems, scientific discoveries, artistic achievements, philosophical insights from multiple alien civilizations they've encountered. The offer added another dimension to the decision. Humanity wouldn't just be saving lives. They would be preserving knowledge and culture that represented the achievements of multiple intelligent species. Admiral Morrison activated his personal communication device, connecting him directly to the commanders of all 12 ships in the war fleet. All hands, this is Admiral Morrison. Prepare for immediate departure to coordinates that will be transmitted to all navigation officers within the hour. We have been presented with an opportunity to prevent genocide on an interstellar scale. More than that, we have the chance to establish humanity as a force for justice and protection in this galaxy. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle across the fleet. This will be humanity's first interstellar war, fought alongside alien allies against an enemy that has already proven its willingness to commit atrocities beyond imagination. Every person in this fleet volunteered to defend humanity and our values. Today we extend that defense to our new neighbors among the stars. As preparation orders began flowing throughout the fleet, Chen watched the tactical displays showing the desperate situation in Keith space. In 3 weeks, humanity would either announce itself as a major galactic power or risk everything in a battle they barely understood against enemies they had never faced. The journey through hyperspace had been the longest 3 weeks of Commander Chen's life. The UES Retribution, along with 11 other vessels of humanity's war fleet, hurtled through the void between galaxies at speeds that bent the laws of physics. During those weeks, every hour had been spent studying Keith intelligence reports, analyzing Harvester tactical patterns, and preparing for a type of warfare that no human had ever experienced. Now, as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keith home system, Chen stood on her bridge watching humanity's first glimpse of an alien civilization under siege. "My God," breathed Lieutenant Rodriguez, his voice barely audible above the hum of the ship's systems. The main view screen displayed a sight that defied comprehension. The Keith home system was a fortress built across multiple planets and artificial installations. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the primary world, connected by energy bridges that pulsed with defensive power. Space stations the size of cities floated in perfect geometric formations, their surfaces bristling with weapons arrays and communication towers. But even more impressive than the defensive installations were the Keith themselves. The first alien vessels to approach the human fleet were elegant constructions of crystalline and metallic materials that seemed to flow like liquid while maintaining structural integrity. Their ships moved with a grace that suggested mastery of gravitational manipulation rather than crude thrust systems. "Commander," called out Communications Officer Martinez, "we're receiving a transmission on the quantum channel. The Keith are requesting permission to send a diplomatic party aboard the flagship." Chen activated her personal communicator, connecting to Admiral Morrison aboard the Sovereignty. "Admiral, request permission to accompany the diplomatic team. The Retribution has been processing Keith communications longer than any other vessel." Morrison's voice carried the strain of 3 weeks of intense preparation. "Granted, Commander. Bring Dr. Yamamoto as well. We'll need our best xenolinguist for face-to-face contact." 20 minutes later, Chen found herself aboard the Sovereignty's main docking bay, watching as an alien shuttle approached with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. The vessel itself was a work of art, translucent materials that revealed internal energy flows, coupled with external surfaces that seemed to shift color in response to some unknown stimulus. Dr. Yamamoto stood beside her, clutching a tablet loaded with every piece of linguistic analysis she had compiled during their journey. "Commander, I have to admit I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. Everything we've learned about the Keith suggests a highly sophisticated culture, but we're about to discover how accurately we've interpreted their communications." The alien shuttle touched down with barely a whisper of sound. For several moments nothing happened. Then with a soft chime, an opening appeared in the vessel's side. Not a door or hatch, but simply a space where none had existed before. 3 figures emerged, and Chen felt her breath catch in her throat. The Keith were humanoid, but only in the most basic sense. They stood approximately 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and torsos that suggested evolution under lower gravity. Their skin appeared to be composed of the same crystalline material as their ships, shifting between translucent and opaque as emotions or thoughts seemed to flow across their surfaces. Most striking were their faces, angular features that somehow conveyed both intelligence and deep sadness. Their eyes were larger than human proportions would suggest, containing depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom and recent trauma. The central figure approached Admiral Morrison with movements that managed to be both alien and somehow familiar. When it spoke, the words came through a translation device that rendered the musical tones of their language into crisp, formal English. "Admiral Morrison of the Human Starfleet. I am Coordinator Zethka of the Keith Collective. We welcome you to our final sanctuary with gratitude that spans the void between species." Morrison stepped forward, his military bearing somehow managing to convey both respect and strength. "Coordinator Zethka, humanity is honored to meet the Keith people. We have come in response to your distress signal, prepared to stand with you against the Harvester threat." Zethka's crystalline features shifted, displaying what Chen interpreted as surprise, mixed with hope. "Your species travels farther and faster than our projections suggested possible. The courage required to answer our call across such distances speaks well of human character." Dr. Yamamoto moved closer, her scientific curiosity overcoming diplomatic protocol. "Coordinator, Your communication technologies have allowed us to learn much about your situation, but we have many questions about optimal tactical coordination. The alien turned toward Yamamoto, and Chen noticed that the Keith's eyes seemed to focus not just on the doctor, but somehow beyond her, as if seeing multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Yamamoto, your linguistic analyses have been remarkably accurate. We are prepared to share all tactical intelligence and coordinate our remaining defensive capabilities with your fleet. Admiral Morrison gestured toward the Sovereignty's briefing areas. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more formal setting. We have tactical questions about harvester capabilities and strategic planning for the defense of your system. As the group moved through the ship's corridors, Chen noticed how the Keith moved with an efficiency that suggested perfect spatial awareness. They never collided with obstacles or crew members, never hesitated at intersections, never seemed uncertain about their environment. It was as if they possessed some form of enhanced perception that allowed them to navigate three-dimensional space with supernatural precision. The main briefing room had been configured for the meeting, with holographic displays showing both human and Keith tactical assessments. As they settled into discussion, Coordinator Zeth-Ka activated a device that projected a real-time view of the system's outer perimeter. The harvester fleet will arrive within 18 standard hours, Zeth-Ka explained, manipulating the display to show enemy force projections. Our intelligence indicates approximately 400 vessels of various configurations, supported by mobile processing facilities and command ships. Commander Chen studied the projections, comparing them to humanity's 12-ship fleet. The numbers were staggering. They were outnumbered more than 30 to 1. Coordinator, what advantages do our combined forces possess? Zeth-Ka's features shifted again, this time displaying what Chen recognized as grim determination. Human weapon systems operate on principles that the harvesters have not encountered. Your kinetic projectile weapons and nuclear warheads function differently from our energy-based defensive systems. This may provide tactical surprise. Additionally, Zeth-Ka continued, our defensive installations have been designed over 30 years of preparation. The orbital platforms contain weapons capable of destroying even the largest harvester vessels, but they require precise coordination to achieve optimal targeting solutions. Admiral Morrison leaned forward. What you're describing sounds like a combined arms approach. Human ships providing mobile support while Keith installations deliver precision strikes. Precisely, Admiral. But there is another factor that may prove decisive. The harvesters operate through collective consciousness networks, disrupt their communication systems, and individual vessels become far less effective. Dr. Yamamoto's linguistic analysis suggested that human electronic warfare capabilities might be uniquely suited to this task. Chen felt a surge of excitement. Electronic warfare had been one of humanity's most advanced military technologies, developed through centuries of terrestrial conflict. If they could turn that expertise against the harvester networks, they might be able to level the tactical playing field. Coordinator, Dr. Yamamoto interjected, we've analyzed the communication protocols you shared with us. Human computer systems should be able to generate interference patterns that the harvesters won't recognize until it's too late. Zeth-Ka's crystalline features brightened noticeably. This confirms our strategic projections. However, there is one more element that may determine the outcome of the battle. The harvesters have been studying Keith defensive patterns for 50 years. They will not expect the tactical flexibility that human forces can provide. Admiral Morrison stood, his expression reflecting the weight of command decisions that would affect the survival of two civilizations. Coordinator Zeth-Ka, humanity accepts the honor of standing with the Keith people in defense of your home system. We propose a coordinated battle plan that leverages both our species' strengths against this common enemy. As tactical planning began in earnest, Chen realized that humanity was about to fight its first interstellar war not for conquest or resources, but for the simple principle that genocide was unacceptable, regardless of which species was threatened. The next 18 hours would determine whether two civilizations could stand together against a force that had already destroyed dozens of others. The harvester fleet materialized at the edge of the Keith system like a spreading infection. Commander Chen watched from the bridge of the Retribution as hundreds of alien vessels dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Each ship appeared to be grown rather than built, with organic curves that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns suggesting some form of living technology. Tactical analysis confirms Keith intelligence projections, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. 412 vessels detected, ranging from frigate-sized scouts to dreadnoughts that dwarf anything in human space. Chen studied the enemy formation through her command display. The harvesters moved with the coordination of a swarm organism, maintaining perfect spacing and communication as they advanced toward the inner system. Their approach was methodical, confident, suggesting they had performed this same tactical operation countless times before. "Commander," called Communications Officer Martinez, receiving tactical updates from Coordinator Zethka. "The Keith defensive platforms are powering up, and they're requesting confirmation of our electronic warfare capabilities." Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system, addressing all 12 ships of the human fleet simultaneously. "All vessels, this is Admiral Morrison. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Electronic warfare ships will target harvester communication networks on my command. All other vessels will provide mobile support for Keith defensive installations." Chen activated her ship's combat systems, feeling the familiar vibration as the Retribution's massive weapons arrays came online. Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, each officer focused on their specific role in the coming battle. They had trained for combat scenarios throughout their careers, but none of their simulations had prepared them for warfare on this scale. The first exchange came as the harvester fleet reached the outer defensive perimeter. Keith orbital platforms unleashed beams of coherent energy that carved through space with surgical precision, striking the leading harvester vessels with devastating effect. Several enemy ships simply vanished, their exotic matter hulls unable to withstand the concentrated firepower. But the harvesters adapted with frightening speed. Their formation shifted, spreading out to minimize the effectiveness of the Keith weapons while maintaining their advance. Return fire came as streams of what appeared to be weaponized dark matter, capable of passing through conventional shields and armor as if they didn't exist. "Admiral," Chen broadcast to the flagship, "request permission to begin electronic warfare operations. The harvester communication networks are operating exactly as Keith intelligence predicted. Execute electronic warfare protocols. All ships," Morrison ordered. Chen nodded to her electronic warfare officer, Lieutenant Commander Park. "Begin transmission of interference patterns. Target their collective consciousness networks." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Harvester ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly began displaying erratic behavior. Some vessels collided with their neighbors while others drifted out of formation as their networked guidance systems failed. The mathematical precision of their attack became chaotic confusion in seconds. "Direct hit on their command structure," Park reported with satisfaction. "They're trying to compensate by switching to backup communication protocols. But we're jamming those as well." Coordinator Zethka's voice came through the quantum communication channel, carrying unmistakable excitement. "Human electronic warfare capabilities exceed all projections. Harvester coordination efficiency has decreased by 73%. Keith defensive platforms are achieving optimal targeting solutions." The battle became a deadly dance of technology and tactics. Human ships darted between Keith defensive installations, their smaller size and superior maneuverability, allowing them to exploit gaps in the confused harvester formation. When enemy vessels managed to close range with the defensive platforms, human kinetic weapons and nuclear warheads provided devastating close-range support. Chen watched as the UES Thunderstrike engaged a harvester heavy cruiser that had broken through the outer perimeter. Commander Williams' ship unleashed a barrage of railgun projectiles that punched through the alien vessel's exotic matter hull, followed by nuclear torpedoes that triggered a cascade reaction in the enemy's power systems. "The harvesters are learning to compensate for our electronic warfare," Park warned. "They're developing filtering algorithms for our interference patterns." Chen felt her pulse quicken. The enemy's ability to adapt during combat was their most dangerous characteristic. "Can we modify our transmission patterns to stay ahead of their countermeasures?" "Working on it, Commander, but they're adapting faster than we anticipated." On the tactical display, Chen could see the harvester fleet beginning to reorganize. Their initial confusion was giving way to a more distributed command structure that was less vulnerable to electronic interference. The window of opportunity provided by their technological surprise was closing rapidly. "Admiral Morrison," she broadcast, "the Harvesters are adapting to our electronic warfare. We need to modify our tactical approach before they regain full coordination." Morrison's response came immediately. "All ships execute Battle Plan Delta. Close formation around Keith platform clusters. We're shifting to direct engagement protocols." The human fleet reformed around the massive Keith defensive installations, creating interlocking fields of fire that forced the Harvesters to approach through carefully controlled corridors. It was a risky strategy that put human ships directly in the path of the enemy's most powerful weapons, but it also maximized their ability to support the Keith platforms. Chen guided the Retribution into position, alongside a particularly large Keith installation that Coordinator Zethka had identified as Platform Prime. The alien structure was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, bristling with energy weapons and protected by shields that bent space-time itself around the facility. "Commander," Rodriguez called out, "massive energy spike detected from the Harvester fleet. They're charging some kind of superweapon." The main display shifted to show a group of the largest Harvester vessels linking together with streams of dark energy. The combined formation began generating a field of distorted space that grew larger and more unstable with each passing second. Dr. Yamamoto's voice came through the communication system from the Sovereignty. "Commander Chen, the Keith have identified this weapon. It's called a reality disruptor, capable of unmaking the fundamental particles that compose normal matter. If they complete the charging sequence, they can erase everything within a light-minute radius." Chen felt ice form in her stomach. A weapon that could unmake matter itself was beyond anything in human experience. Traditional defensive measures would be useless against technology that operated at the subatomic level. "Time to completion of the charging sequence?" Chen asked. "Keith estimates 4 minutes 17 seconds, Yamamoto replied. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "All ships target the reality disruptor formation with everything we have. Nuclear warheads, kinetic projectiles, energy weapons. Throw everything at those linked vessels." The combined human and Keith fleet focused their firepower on the charging weapon system. Beams of coherent energy, nuclear explosions, and streams of hypervelocity projectiles converged on the Harvester superweapon formation. But the linked vessels were protected by a reality distortion field that deflected or absorbed most incoming attacks. "Direct hits confirmed, but minimal damage to target," reported the weapons officer aboard the Retribution. "Their defensive field is operating on principles we don't understand." Chen stared at the tactical display, watching the reality disruptor's charging cycle approach completion. In less than 3 minutes, the weapon would be capable of erasing a significant portion of the defending fleet, along with several Keith installations. Then, an idea struck her with the force of revelation. "Rodriguez, can we modify our electronic warfare systems to target the quantum entanglement networks that link those Harvester vessels?" The lieutenant's fingers flew across his console. "Commander, the entanglement field is incredibly complex. But theoretically, yes. If we can disrupt the quantum coherence between the vessels, the reality disruptor should collapse." Chen opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "Admiral Morrison, request permission to attempt quantum disruption of the Harvester superweapon. It's theoretical, but it may be our only option." Morrison's approval came without hesitation. "Execute immediately, Commander. All ships will provide covering fire." As the Retribution's modified electronic warfare systems began targeting the quantum entanglement field holding the reality disruptor together, Chen realized that humanity's first interstellar battle was about to be decided by their ability to improvise solutions to problems they had never imagined facing. The quantum disruption beam lanced out from the Retribution with invisible precision, targeting the entanglement field that held the reality disruptor's component vessels together. For several agonizing seconds, nothing seemed to happen. The massive Harvester weapon continued its charging sequence, the space around it bending and warping as fundamental forces were manipulated beyond their natural limits. Then, suddenly the impossible happened. The quantum coherence field collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The linked Harvester vessels, no longer unified by their entanglement network, lost their synchronized energy patterns. The reality disruptor's charging sequence became unstable. and the exotic matter contained within its generators began consuming itself in a cascade of uncontrolled reactions. "Direct hit on the quantum field," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "The superweapon is destabilizing." Commander Chen watched as the reality disruptor's collapse triggered a chain reaction that rippled through the Harvester fleet. Ships that had been linked to the weapon system found their own exotic matter cores becoming unstable. Secondary explosions bloomed across the enemy formation as vessel after vessel succumbed to the spreading quantum instability. "Admiral Morrison," Chen broadcast to the fleet, "the quantum disruption exceeded all projections. The Harvester fleet is experiencing cascading system failures across their entire formation." Morrison's voice carried a mixture of relief and amazement. "Confirmed, Commander. All ships press the advantage. Target any Harvester vessels still showing active signatures." The tide of battle turned with startling speed. Harvester ships that had seemed invincible moments before now struggled with failing systems and disrupted coordination networks. The Keith defensive platforms capitalized on the confusion, their energy weapons finding targets with devastating accuracy. Coordinator Zethka's voice came through the quantum communication channel, carrying an emotional resonance that the translation system struggled to convey. "Human tactical innovation has achieved what 50 years of Keith resistance could not. The Harvester fleet is in full retreat." Chen watched as the surviving enemy vessels began withdrawing toward the edge of the system. Their retreat was chaotic, lacking the precise coordination that had characterized their initial approach. Ships collided in their haste to escape, while others drifted powerlessly as their exotic matter drives failed to restart. "Commander," called out Lieutenant Commander Park from the electronic warfare station, "we're detecting massive data transmissions from the retreating Harvesters. They're broadcasting everything that happened here to their larger fleet networks." The implications hit Chen immediately. The Harvesters were sharing information about human capabilities, tactics, and weaknesses with their entire collective. Future encounters would not benefit from the element of surprise that had proven so decisive in this battle. Dr. Yamamoto's voice came through the communication system from the Sovereignty. "Commander Chen, the Keith are requesting immediate tactical debriefing. They want to understand how we achieved quantum disruption of the reality disruptor." Admiral Morrison's orders followed quickly. "All ship commanders report to the Sovereignty for a strategic planning session. The Harvesters will be back and they'll be prepared for our tactics next time." 2 hours later, Chen found herself in the flagship's main briefing room, surrounded by human and Keith officers analyzing the battle's implications. The holographic displays showed damage assessments, tactical performance data, and projections for future Harvester operations. Coordinator Zethka stood at the center of the presentation, their crystalline features displaying what Chen had learned to recognize as deep thoughtfulness. "The quantum disruption technique developed by Commander Chen represents a fundamental breakthrough in anti-Harvester warfare. However, our victory here will force them to modify their tactics significantly." Admiral Morrison nodded grimly. "Coordinator, what's your assessment of their likely response?" "The Harvesters operate as a collective learning organism. They will adapt their technology to counter quantum disruption attacks, modify their fleet compositions to reduce vulnerability to electronic warfare, and likely develop countermeasures for human kinetic weapons." Commander Williams leaned forward. "How long before they return with those modifications?" Zethka consulted a device that projected complex mathematical models into the air. "Conservative estimates suggest 6 to 8 months for technological adaptation, another 4 to 6 months for fleet reorganization and strategic planning. They will return with approximately 3 times their previous numbers." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had won this battle through innovation and courage, but the war was far from over. The Harvesters would return stronger, smarter, and specifically prepared to counter human advantages. "However," Zethka continued, "this victory has provided opportunities that did not exist before. Harvester retreat patterns indicate the location of their primary construction facilities. We now possess target coordinates for their strategic manufacturing centers." Chen felt her tactical instincts engaging. "Coordinator, are you suggesting a preemptive strike against their industrial capacity?" "The possibility exists. Harvester manufacturing systems require decades to establish and are difficult to relocate. Destroying their primary construction facilities would severely limit their ability to replace losses and adapt new technologies." Admiral Morrison stood, beginning his characteristic pacing routine. The logistics would be staggering. We're talking about offensive operations potentially hundreds of light years from friendly space, against targets we know almost nothing about. Dr. Yamamoto activated her analysis tablet, pulling up intelligence gathered during the battle. Admiral, the Keith databases contain detailed information about 17 other civilizations that fought the Harvesters. If we combine their tactical experience with human innovation, we might be able to develop entirely new approaches to interstellar warfare. Chen studied the data streams flowing across the displays. Each piece of information represented knowledge purchased with the blood of species that no longer existed. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on everyone in the room. There's another factor to consider, Chen said, addressing the assembled officers. Today, humanity announced itself as a major galactic power. Word of this battle will spread to every surviving civilization in this region of space. We'll receive requests for aid, alliance proposals, and potentially hostility from species that see us as threats. Coordinator Zethka's features shifted to display what Chen interpreted as approval. Commander Chen demonstrates wisdom beyond her years. The galaxy has observed human capabilities and moral character. Your species will be judged not only by your military effectiveness, but by your willingness to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Admiral Morrison stopped pacing and faced the group. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored Keith allies, we stand at a crossroads that will define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations. Today we chose to answer a distress call from strangers. Tomorrow, we may need to lead a coalition of species against a threat that endangers intelligent life itself. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officers began processing the strategic implications. Humanity had sought to explore the stars in peace, but they had discovered a universe where survival required strength and the courage to use it in defense of others. Chen looked through the briefing room's viewports at the alien stars surrounding them, thinking about Earth and the colonies that seemed impossibly distant. Somewhere among those stars, the Harvesters were regrouping, planning, adapting their technology to eliminate the threat that humanity represented. But they had also proven something that would resonate throughout the galaxy. When faced with the choice between safety and justice, between self-preservation and defending others, humanity had chosen to stand with their new allies against impossible odds. The war was far from over. But for the first time in 50 years, the Harvesters had experienced defeat. And across the galaxy, other species would remember that when the darkness seemed complete, when genocide appeared inevitable, a young species called humanity had answered the call for help. The distress signal had been answered, but the real work of building a coalition capable of ending the Harvester threat was just beginning. Chen smiled grimly as she contemplated the challenges ahead. Humanity had always been at their best when the odds seemed impossible.